was a long day on the road, the kind that stretches out like the endless highway ahead of us. Sarah and I were traveling across the country to visit family on the West Coast. As the sun set, we found ourselves pulling into a small, picturesque town. It seemed like a good place to rest for the night. We chose an old hotel near a small lake, known for its quiet charm. The hotel stood there, looking like it had seen better days but still holding on to its elegance. It was inviting, with its antique decorations and dimly lit hallways that whispered of times long gone. As we checked in, the air felt cooler, and there was a slight mustiness that clung to the faded wallpaper. The place had a certain eeriness, the kind that makes the back of your neck tingle, especially when the wind howled softly outside like a low murmur. Little did we know, our night there would turn out to be more restless than we could have ever imagined. After settling into our room, we noticed right away how quiet the hotel was, almost too quiet. The stillness was unsettling. We had asked for a room with a view of the lake when we checked in, but the receptionist told us it wasn't available. She hesitated before saying that a man had passed away there a few nights ago, and the room was closed off until further notice. That bit of news sent a chill through me, but we were too tired to think much about it then. Later that night, as we tried to sleep, I started to notice a strange smell. It was faint at first, like something burning very far away. Sarah said she couldn't smell anything, but the odor grew stronger, and soon she felt it too, a sharp metallic scent that seemed to seep through the cracks around the door. Then, by the early morning as we were still trying to sleep, the headaches began. Mine was just a dull ache at the base of my skull at first, but Sarah's was worse. She clutched her head and curled up on the bed, wincing with every throb. I got up to get her some water from the bathroom, and that's when the room started to spin around me. The dizziness hit me hard, and I had to grab onto the wall to keep from falling. As Sarah's and my condition worsened, a memory flashed through my mind. A news story from a couple of years ago about a family who had succumbed to carbon monoxide poisoning at a rental property, a few neighborhoods away from where we live on the East Coast. I felt suddenly panicked as I pieced together our symptoms with the grim possibility. I tried to stand, my legs shaky and weak under the weight of my growing dizziness. I stumbled towards the room phone, intent on calling the front desk for help. My hands trembled as I picked up the receiver, only to find dead silence on the other end. The line was completely dead. Realizing we couldn't wait for help, I mustered what strength I had left to drag myself to the room door. Sarah was nearly unconscious now, barely whispering my name. With great effort, I managed to open it. The night air, chillingly cold, rushed into the room. It was harsh and biting, but it was fresh, a stark contrast to the tainted atmosphere inside. I gulped it down, hoping it wasn't too late for us. Feeling my consciousness slipping, I knew we had to get out. I wrapped my arm around Sarah, dragging us both towards the door. Each step was a battle against the weight of my own body. Just as we neared the door, my vision blurred, and I collapsed and fell to the floor. Fading in and out of consciousness, the door swung open wider, and a woman rushed in. She knelt beside us, quickly assessing the situation. "I'm a nurse," she announced, her voice calm and authoritative. She must have been staying in the hotel too. Recognizing the signs of carbon monoxide poisoning, she acted fast. She grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and explained our symptoms to the emergency operator. The nurse didn't waste any time. With the help of some of the other guests who started to gather after she had called for help, she dragged us out of the room, propping us up to make sure we breathed in as much fresh air as possible. "Stay with me," she kept saying, her voice a steady beacon as she checked our pulses and talked to us, keeping us engaged and conscious. Soon, the sound of sirens approached, and paramedics came running to our aid. They quickly gave us oxygen masks, which helped clear the dizziness and nausea almost immediately. Meanwhile, the nurse explained to the hotel staff what she suspected. The hotel manager, pale-faced and anxious, ordered an immediate evacuation of the building. Later, we learned that the source of the carbon monoxide was a faulty boiler located just below our room, and a blocked exhaust vent had made things worse. It was a frightening oversight that could have cost more lives, but thanks to the quick actions of the nurse and the emergency services, everyone was safe. As we sat in the back of the ambulance, wrapped in warm blankets and breathing deeply, relief washed over us. We were safe now, the danger past, all thanks to the alertness and quick thinking of a fellow guest. After a short stay in the local hospital, Sarah and I were back on our feet, feeling lucky to be alive. We were deeply shaken by the experience, more so when we learned that the same hidden danger that almost took our lives had claimed another just days before. It turned out the previous guest's death in that room with the lake view was also due to carbon monoxide poisoning. The hotel hadn't done enough to find the cause or fix it. As we drove away from the town, Sarah and I talked a lot about how narrowly we had escaped. We decided we couldn't just move on without doing something. We started advocating for stricter safety measures in hotels and began sharing our story online. We wanted everyone to know how dangerous carbon monoxide can be, especially in places you'd least expect, like a quaint hotel room. Our ordeal made us more cautious and proactive, always checking our surroundings wherever we stayed. We never wanted to face such a threat again, and we hoped our efforts could prevent others from experiencing a similar scare. Early last summer, I needed a quiet place to finish my first novel. I had recently quit my safe but mundane post office job to pursue my true passion, writing. I put everything on the success of this novel, believing it was my best shot to make a name for myself. Living in a house with roommates in their 20s, glancing between work and partying made it impossible to focus. I needed a place where I could be inspired and finish the final stretch of my novel. I found an Airbnb in a picturesque coastal town that seemed perfect. The listing showed a small, affordable, cozy apartment on the ground floor with a little deck that had a side view of the ocean. It seemed perfect for a peaceful retreat where I could focus on my writing. When I arrived, the building looked more run down than in the photos. The paint was peeling, and the garden was overgrown. Still, I was determined to make the best of it. As I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the apartment felt a bit neglected. The furniture was worn, and there was a faint smell of dampness in the air. But it had charm, with wooden floors and a small fireplace. I decided it was good enough for a few days of writing and relaxation. I settled in, unpacking my things and setting up my laptop on the small dining table. The view from the deck was nice, with the ocean in the distance and the sound of waves crashing gently. As I prepared dinner, I heard footsteps outside. I peeked through the window but saw nothing. Shrugging it off as wildlife or a neighbor, I continued cooking. Later, while watching TV, I heard the footsteps again, this time accompanied by the creaking of the deck. Feeling a bit uneasy, I checked the front door to make sure it was locked and went to bed. But as I lay there in the dark, the silence seemed oppressive. Every creak and groan of the old building made me more aware of how alone I was. The wind rustled through the trees, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I pulled the blankets tighter around me, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that had settled over me. I told myself it was just my imagination running wild, a consequence of too many late-night horror movies and the stress of my self-imposed deadline. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, and this was just the beginning. Later that night, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. Completely startled, I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The door was ajar, but no one was there. I got up and searched the apartment, my nerves on edge. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows and making me jump at every gust. I checked the front door and the windows to ensure they were locked. Everything seemed in order, but I couldn't shake the terrible feeling of being watched. I locked the bedroom door and tried to go back to sleep, but the eerie feeling lingered. The sense of isolation in this quiet building made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The next day, I decided to explore the town. It was a charming place with quaint shops, friendly locals, and beautiful ocean views. The sunlight and the bustling activity of the town made me feel better, temporarily pushing away the unease from the night before. I found a perfect spot on a terrace cafe where I enjoyed a very productive few hours working and eating. I head back to the apartment in the afternoon, annoyed that I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling from the night before. I wanted to write some more, but this was not what I had hoped for when I imagined an inspiring space. When I opened the door, a distinct smell of cigarette smoke hit me. I didn't smoke, and I knew I hadn't left anything burning. The smell was strong and unsettling, permeating the air like an unwelcome guest. I checked every room, trying to find the source of the smell, but everything seemed normal. The windows were closed, and there were no signs of anyone having been inside. The lingering smell of smoke was mixed with a faint, musty odor, like old books left too long in a damp basement. The eerie feeling from the night before came back stronger. Determined to understand what was going on, I decided to check the rest of the building. I ventured into the dimly lit hallway, the floors creaking under my weight. The hallway was lined with closed doors, each one seemingly more ominous than the last. As I walked, I noticed a flickering light coming from under one of the doors. My pulse quickened as I approached, but when I knocked, there was no answer. The building was silent, except for the occasional groan of the old structure. I walked up the dirty stairs, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. What I found completely creeped me out. The apartments above mine were all empty, their doors wide open, leading into dark, vacant spaces. As I peered into the empty rooms, I could tell they had not been occupied for months. The silence was deafening, and the darkness seemed to swallow the light. The feeling was so eerie, I rushed back downstairs to my apartment, my heart pounding. I was alone, all alone, in this entire 3-story apartment building. I contacted the host and tried to sound calm as though I was just curious about the vacancy of the building, and the host quickly replied that they had just recently bought the previously abandoned building, and that they are renovating the apartments one by one and renting out as ready. He sounded matter of fact, and I had no reason to suspect that there was anything more sinister about it. Although I told myself to man up and stop overthinking it, I just couldn't get comfortable. That night I barricaded the bedroom door with a chair and kept a heavy lamp by the bed as a makeshift weapon. Around midnight, I heard someone trying to open the door again. The doorknob rattled, and there was a frustrated grunt followed by footsteps walking away. I could barely breathe. I stayed awake, clutching the lamp tightly, my eyes fixed on the door, waiting for something to happen. In the morning, I cautiously opened the bedroom door. I noticed muddy footprints near the back door, confirming my worst fears. Someone had been inside. I knew I couldn't stay another night. I quickly packed my things, my hands trembling, and left the apartment. I reported the incident to Airbnb, leaving a 1 rating on the property. The host seemed genuinely concerned in their response to my rating. If he did have something to do with it, I preferred not to imagine what his intentions could have been for visiting the apartment at night. And if it is some stranger up to no good taking advantage of the vacancy and isolation of the building, I wanted other guests to know what they were signing up for. After leaving the Airbnb, I couldn't get the experience out of my mind. It was terrifying and surreal, but it also sparked a creative fire in me. I started incorporating the eerie details and unsettling feelings into my novel. The sense of isolation, the unexplained footsteps, and the oppressive silence, all of it found a place in my story. It was as if the fear and tension I experienced became the driving force behind my writing. My editor loved the new direction of the novel, especially the parts inspired by my Airbnb experience. They said it added a layer of realism and suspense that made the story much more compelling. The novel is currently being published, and I am eager to see how it is received. The ordeal not only enhanced my writing, but also taught me something important about channeling real-life fears into art. The unsettling experience, which initially felt like a setback, turned out to be a blessing in disguise. It gave my story the authenticity and depth it needed, transforming my work from just another novel into a gripping tale of suspense and fear. As I wait for my book to hit the shelves, I can't help but feel a mix of excitement and nervousness. The very experience that nearly drove me away from my dream might now be the cornerstone of my success. Sometimes, the scariest moments in life have the potential to become the most powerful stories, and I can't wait to see how readers react to the fear and tension that haunted me during those sleepless nights. It was late on a Friday evening when I finally got home after a long week on a business trip. The sun had set, and the sky was darkening quickly. My two-story house stood quietly at the end of our suburban street. It's an older house with a lot of character, including an old brick fireplace in the living room that I rarely use. Mostly, it's just there to look nice. After parking my car in the driveway, I grabbed my suitcase and the week's worth of mail from the mailbox. I felt a strange unease, but I brushed it off, thinking I was just tired. I went inside, turned on the lights, and tossed the mail on the kitchen counter. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, after the noise of the city and the bustle of travel. I changed into something comfortable, put my dirty clothes into the washing machine, and made myself a quick sandwich. With a beer in hand, I settled down on the couch in front of the TV. The comforting hum of my favorite show started playing in the background as I began to sift through the pile of mail. It was mostly bills and junk, but then I found something that made me sit up straight. Among the usual letters was a plain envelope with no return address. I opened it and pulled out a note. It read, "We don't want any trouble, just what's in the fireplace. Leave it outside your door at exactly 9 p.m. tonight, then switch off the lights, walk away, and wait 15 minutes to return." At first, I didn't understand what I was reading. Who would leave such a note, and why? My heart started to pound as I realized this wasn't a joke. Something was very wrong. As I read the note again, I felt really uneasy. My hands shook a bit as the words sank in. "We don't want any trouble, just what's in the fireplace." I looked over at the old fireplace, which now seemed more spooky than decorative. I had no idea what could be hidden inside it. I stood up, leaving my dinner untouched, and walked slowly towards the fireplace. I took out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and pointed it up the chimney. The light showed something shiny. I reached in and found 3 diamond necklaces tangled together, shining strangely in the flashlight. Above where I found the necklaces, there was a piece of net that was ripped. It looked like the necklaces were supposed to be hidden higher up in the chimney but had fallen down. This made me think, these must be stolen items, hidden here by someone who now wanted them back. Just then, I heard noises from outside that made me stop and listen. It sounded like footsteps on the gravel driveway. I walked quietly to the window and peeked through the curtains. The streetlights made long shadows in the yard, but I could see a few men moving around quietly outside my house. They were definitely here for the necklaces. I stepped back from the window. The instructions in the note were clear, but now it was obvious I was in real danger. Thinking about these men outside, ready to get back what was hidden in my home, made me really scared. They were waiting for me to do what the note said, and I had to figure out fast what to do next. I knew I had to act quickly to avoid any danger. I grabbed the necklaces, rushed to the front door, and set them outside on the porch. Then, I turned off all the lights in the house as the note instructed. As I moved away from the door, I peeked through the window. In the dim light, I could see several dark figures moving quickly towards my door. My stomach turned with fear. Even though I was doing what they asked, the sight of them was terrifying. I waited in the dark, trying to stay calm. But soon, I heard noises at the front door. Someone was trying to pick the lock. My heart raced. I had done what the note said, but they were still trying to get in. I couldn't let them find me inside. I moved as quietly as I could toward the back door, hoping to sneak out or find a better place to hide. Just as I reached the back door, a flashlight beam swept through the living room. I dropped to the floor and crawled quickly toward the basement door. My hands were shaking, and my breaths were short and quick. I made it to the basement and closed the door softly behind me, descending into the darkness below. From my hiding spot in the basement, I could hear them walking around upstairs. They were talking in low, urgent voices. "Make sure no one's here," one of them whispered. "We can't leave any witnesses." Their words made my skin crawl. I quietly pulled out my phone and started recording their conversation. They were talking about the necklaces and someone they called the boss. I kept recording, hoping to capture anything that might help identify them later. The fear was overwhelming, but I knew I had to stay hidden and collect any evidence I could. The men upstairs seemed to find the necklaces quickly because the noise of their searching stopped. But they didn't leave. Instead, their footsteps grew louder and more frantic, as if they were looking for something, or someone, else. I realized they might think I had called the police, and that thought made my pulse race even faster. They started moving towards the basement door, and I knew I had to act fast to get out without being caught. In a moment of quick thinking, I grabbed a heavy old tool from the basement shelf and hurled it at the small window at the far end of the basement. The glass shattered with a loud crash, sending pieces flying out into the dark backyard. The sound was enough to startle the intruders, and I heard their footsteps halt and then divert towards the noise. This was my chance. As they investigated the broken window, I quietly opened the back door and slipped outside. My heart was thumping in my chest as I ran across my backyard, ducking below the fence line to avoid being seen. I didn't stop running until I reached my neighbor's house, several doors down. Panting and out of breath, I knocked urgently on their door. When they answered, I quickly explained the situation and asked to use their phone to call the police. From the safety of their living room, I dialed 911 and reported everything that had happened, including the intruders in my house and the evidence I had recorded on my phone. As I spoke to the dispatcher, I felt a mix of fear and relief wash over me. I was safe for now, but the night's events had left me shaken. The police arrived at my house quickly, but by the time they got there, the criminals had already left with the necklaces. They scoured the area, but found no trace of them in the immediate surroundings. I showed the officers the broken basement window where I had escaped and where they had likely exited. Then I played them the recording I had captured on my phone. Their voices and the details of their conversation were clear, giving the police something solid to work with. I also described their appearances as best as I could from what little I had seen. As I talked with the police, the reality of what had just happened began to really sink in. I felt a rush of relief that I was safe, but also a lingering fear about how close I had come to a potentially deadly situation. The thought that these men had been in my home, searching for me, was deeply unsettling. I realized just how vulnerable I had been. Determined to never feel so helpless again, I decided to invest in a comprehensive security system for my home. I researched the best options and had cameras and alarms installed around my property. I knew that from now on, I needed to be more vigilant and prepared. The sense of security I had taken for granted was shaken, and I knew things couldn't just go back to how they were. Despite the fear and disruption it caused, I felt grateful that I was unharmed and that I'd been able to provide valuable information to the police. Helping in the investigation made me feel like I was taking back some control over the situation. It gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, it would help prevent this from happening to someone else. As I settled back into life, my home felt different, safer with the new security, but forever changed by one startlingly dangerous night. This summer, I decided to visit Savannah, Georgia, a city known for its rich history and beautiful, eerie buildings. One hotel caught my eye, famous for its Gothic architecture and old-world charm. It was a humid evening when I checked in, the kind where you can feel the air stick to your skin. I was excited to review this place, but I was also a bit on edge. Something about the towering dark windows and the creaky floorboards added a real creepy vibe to the whole scene. As I walked into the lobby, I was surrounded by antique furniture that looked like it came straight from a different century. The dim lighting and the soft murmur of the other guests chatting added to the mysterious atmosphere. I got my room key from the front desk, a heavy brass piece that felt cool in my hand, and headed to my room, ready to dive into another adventure. Little did I know, this stay was going to be more of an adventure than I had ever expected. After dropping my bags off and taking a quick glance around, I decided to freshen up a bit. That's when I noticed something odd about the bathroom. Among the old-fashioned tiles and a clawfoot tub, the faucet stood out. It was way too modern and didn't fit with the rest of the decor. What's more, it had a persistent drip, no matter how hard I tried to twist it shut. It was just a small thing, but in the quiet of the room, each drop echoed a bit louder than it should have. I sat down to work on my laptop, typing up some initial thoughts for my blog. But it was hard to focus. The walls seemed almost too thin, carrying sounds from the neighboring rooms. I could hear muffled conversations, nothing clear enough to make out entirely, but I caught a serious tone in one voice, something about keeping it quiet. It made me pause, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Was someone arguing? Or was it something else? The room was growing dim as the sun set, and I was about to get up and turn on a lamp when there was a knock at the door. Startled, I walked over and opened it to find a man in a hotel uniform. But unlike the neatly dressed staff at the front desk, his clothes looked worn, his shirt untucked. He told me there were reports of a leak in some of the bathrooms, and he needed to check mine. I hesitated for a moment. Something about him didn't seem quite right. But the thought of that dripping faucet nudged me to step aside and let him in, wondering if maybe this was just part of the hotel's quirky charm. As soon as the man stepped into the bathroom, he spun around and snapped the door lock shut with a quick flick of his wrist. Before I could even process what was happening, he pulled out a knife. "Your valuables now," he demanded, his voice low and menacing. I was stunned, frozen in place by the sudden threat, as I realized this was no maintenance check. Without giving me a chance to react, he grabbed a roll of duct tape from his pocket and pressed a piece over my mouth, muffling my attempts to scream. He then forced my hands behind my back, tying them tightly around the cold, hard pipe under the sink. The more I struggled, the tighter the bindings felt, digging into my wrists and anchoring me in place. I felt a sense of panic when I realized I had no way of calling for help or trying to escape. The terror escalated when I heard him leave the room. Through the thin walls, the sound of him forcing his way into the next room was chillingly clear. There were muffled shouts, a brief scuffle, and then a haunting silence that made my stomach turn. I strained to hear more, hoping for signs that the other guests were okay, but there was nothing, just the heavy, suffocating silence of uncertainty. Suddenly, a loud commotion erupted in the hallway. A voice yelled, "Hey!" and I could hear a scuffle outside. Peeking through the slight gap under the door, I saw shadows moving rapidly. The man burst out of the neighboring room, shoving someone to the floor with such force that I heard the thud from my bathroom prison. He didn't hesitate, sprinting down the hallway with a stolen bag slung over his shoulder, jumping over the railing and disappearing from sight. Locked in the bathroom, tied up and helpless, I felt a mix of fear for my own safety and concern for the injured bystander and the other guests. The hotel that had seemed so charming at first now felt like a trap, one that had closed tightly around me and others, ensnaring us in a nightmare scenario I had never imagined facing. Trapped and terrified, I knew I had to do something. Even though my hands were tied and I couldn't speak, I wasn't going to give up. With all the strength I could muster, I started kicking at the bathroom door. I kicked the towels, the trash can, and anything else within reach, making as much noise as I possibly could. Each loud bang echoed through the bathroom, and I hoped it would catch someone's attention. After what felt like an eternity, I finally heard footsteps hurrying down the hallway. Voices grew louder, and then, the sound of the hotel security trying the door handle. "Hello? Is someone in there?" a voice called out. I tried to respond, but the duct tape muffled my cries. Realizing I was locked in, the security guards didn't hesitate. They forced the door open with a strong push, and light flooded the small bathroom. They found me there, bound to the sink, and quickly untied my hands and removed the tape from my mouth. I took deep breaths, the fresh air feeling like a miracle after the stifling fear. The hotel staff was incredibly apologetic and worried. They immediately called the police, who arrived quickly to investigate. Unfortunately, the robber had already escaped from the hotel, disappearing into the night with whatever he had stolen. The police took my statement and promised they would do everything they could to catch him. Meanwhile, the hotel assured me and the other guests that they would review their security measures to ensure this never happened again. Sitting in the lobby, wrapped in a blanket and sipping a cup of hot tea provided by the hotel, I felt a mix of relief and shock. I was safe, but the reality of what had happened was just beginning to sink in. After everything that happened, I sat down to write about it on my blog. I felt shaken but thankful to be unharmed. It was important for me to share this scary experience, not just to warn others, but also to help myself heal from the trauma. Writing it all down made me realize just how much this ordeal had changed the way I view traveling alone. In my blog post, I urged everyone to be more cautious and to always question when things don't seem right, especially in places where you're supposed to feel safe, like hotels. I emphasized the need for better security measures to prevent anything like this from happening to someone else. As I hit publish on my blog, I hoped that my story would make others more aware and careful, ensuring their travels remain safe and enjoyable. It was late September last year. My boyfriend had just broken up with me, and I was having a really hard time dealing with it. The apartment we shared for 4 years, where I now live alone, was filled with sadness, emotion, and painful memories. But it wasn't until I found out a month after he left that he was dating one of my good friends that I had to get away. I needed space and time away from the terrible mess I suddenly found myself in. I spent a couple of nights online, exploring my options, and found a charming Airbnb cottage in a quiet upstate town, perfect for a peaceful retreat. The host, an older gentleman named Richard, seemed very accommodating during our initial conversations. He sent me detailed instructions on how to access the house and mentioned he lived nearby in case I needed anything. I felt grateful for the years I put into becoming a good enough online copywriter that I could do this full-time, as having the freedom to work from anywhere, I was able to book the place for a whole month. The cottage was deep in the woods, far from the city. As I drove up the winding tree-lined road, I felt a sense of calm. The cottage itself was picturesque, with a rustic wooden exterior and a small garden out front. Inside, it was even more charming. The decor was a blend of old-world charm and modern comfort. Wooden beams on the ceiling, a cozy fireplace, and vintage furniture made it feel like a step back in time. The updated kitchen and bathroom had all the conveniences I needed. I arrived late in the afternoon, just as the sun was setting. The golden light filtered through the trees. I unpacked my things and settled in, hoping for a few days of peace and quiet. The first night was uneventful. I enjoyed the tranquility, reading a book by the fireplace and sipping on hot tea. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. It felt like a perfect escape from my busy life and the turmoil I left behind. As I settled into the cottage, I began to feel a bit better. The serene surroundings and the isolation seemed to be exactly what I needed to clear my head and figure out my next steps. I was ready to leave behind the betrayal and heartbreak, at least for a little while, and find some much-needed peace. On the second night there, however, everything changed. I was jolted awake by a faint knocking at the door around midnight. My heart started pounding as I lay there, listening. I got out of bed and cautiously approached the door. "Who is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's Richard," a voice replied. "There's an emergency. I need to check something inside." Relieved but still nervous, I opened the door. Richard, looking worried, stepped inside. "There have been reports of break-ins in the area," he explained. "I want to make sure everything is secure." We went around the house together, checking windows and doors. Everything seemed fine, but Richard's nervousness made me uneasy. After we finished, he told me to lock everything and be extra careful. Then he left, disappearing into the darkness. The next day, I tried to contact Richard to thank him for his concern and to find out more about these break-ins, but he didn't respond. Another night went by of not getting much sleep as I was so nervous, I was aware of every sound. Feeling uneasy when I had not heard from Richard by the following afternoon, I reached out to Airbnb support. They informed me that Richard's account had been deactivated months ago, and they couldn't reach him either. My heart sank. Who had I let into the house last night? That night, I was even more on edge. Around midnight, I heard the same knocking at the door. This time, I didn't answer. The knocking turned into banging, and then I heard the sound of the front door being forced open. After a moment of cold panic and fear, I felt every bit of survival instinct in me kick in. I got out of the bed, grabbed my phone and the fire poker I had brought upstairs to keep next to the bed, and tiptoed into the bedroom bathroom, climbing into the shower to hide. I called 911 and whispered my situation and the address. I could hear the intruder moving through the house, searching each room. When he entered the bedroom, I hung up and held my breath, praying he wouldn't find me. He shone a flashlight around the room, and I had to control myself to not try to take a peek through the shower curtain, as I could not risk him finding me. After what felt like an eternity, the intruder moved on, continuing to search the house. I stayed hidden, too scared to move. Then suddenly, my phone rang. I forgot to put it on mute. I heard something fall downstairs and then it went quiet. That's when the intruder's steps became incredibly purposeful as I heard him head back up the stairs. At the same time, finally, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The intruder must have heard them too, because he quickly left the house. I stayed in the shower until I heard the police arrive and call out for me. They found me shaken and in shock and calmed me down with some sugared water and a blanket they wrapped around me. They searched the house and found no one, but the back door had been pried open. The police told me that the man was likely a local mystery man and current owner of the cottage, known for targeting Airbnb guests. They told me that the real Richard had left the area months before, and that he sold the property to a Howard Hayes, but that no one in the area has ever met a Howard Hayes. The new owner keeps a very low profile, and they have been suspecting he continues to rent the cottage through a fake Airbnb page pretending to be Richard. They were still trying to understand his motives, but what they do know is that guests over the last couple of months have left almost as soon as they arrived, and no one has any idea what happens in that cottage. The whole thing seemed so warped, I had no idea how to make any sense of it. I felt compelled to get involved and decided to use my network of online gurus to trace the sale of the cottage and try to find out who this Howard Hayes really was. I reached out to a few friends who were experts in cybersecurity and real estate records. Within a few days, we started uncovering some disturbing details. It turned out that the cottage had been sold under suspicious circumstances, with the trail leading to a series of fake identities and shell companies. The more we dug, the more we realized that this Howard Hayes wasn't just a common criminal. He had a twisted obsession with the cottage and its guests, orchestrating events to instill fear and control. With the information we gathered, I shared everything with the police. They were amazed at how much we had uncovered and decided to put me up in a nearby hotel while they worked with me on the investigation. Over the next 2 weeks, we pieced together a case against him, gathering enough evidence to incriminate him. We discovered that he had been watching the guests through hidden cameras and had detailed logs of their movements and behaviors. His sinister intentions went beyond robbery. He derived pleasure from the terror he caused. The authorities were ready to make an arrest, but when they went to apprehend him, he was gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The last trace of any credit card or communication on his fake website was from 10 days ago. Despite their best efforts, the authorities couldn't find any leads. It was like he had fallen off the face of the earth. During those 2 weeks, I grew very connected to the little community. The residents were grateful for my intervention and for bringing my city smarts to help them rid their town of this evil energy. I felt a sense of belonging that I hadn't felt in a long time. They welcomed me with open arms, and their gratitude made me feel like a hero. Though the mystery of Howard Hayes remained unsolved, I found solace in the fact that I had helped bring some peace back to this quiet town. The community and I formed a bond that turned this terrifying experience into something positive. The little town became my regular vacation spot, a place where I found new friends and a sense of purpose. Even though the fear of that night still lingered, I knew I had made a difference. The authorities continued to monitor for any sign of Howard Hayes, but as far as they knew, he had disappeared completely. The community moved forward, and I found a new haven where I could truly escape and heal. It was just another sunny afternoon when I, a single mother, found myself knee-deep in cardboard boxes and packing paper in the living room of my new home. The neighborhood was notably quiet, a stark contrast to the bustling city apartment we had just left. My daughter, just 6 months old, was the reason for our move to this more peaceful suburban area. The house we moved into was charming but old, and it came with the promise of countless DIY projects I was eager to start. While organizing the nursery, I set up a baby monitor, a simple device meant to give me peace of mind as I worked in different parts of the house. The monitor was positioned just right, giving me a clear view of my daughter's crib on the small screen. I tested it, hearing the soft hum of the nursery's air filter through the speaker, and felt good knowing I could hear everything. As the day turned into evening, I continued unpacking, occasionally glancing at the monitor's screen, reassured by the sight of my daughter sleeping peacefully. However, as I moved through the hallway back to the kitchen, a faint whispering caught my attention. It was so soft that at first, I thought I was imagining it. I stopped and listened more closely. There it was again, indistinct whispers coming through the monitor, like a hushed conversation. I shook my head, dismissing it as interference from a neighbor's electronics. After all, these old houses and their outdated wiring could pick up all sorts of signals. But as the whispers persisted, the comfort of my new home became overshadowed by an unsettling feeling that something was not quite right. I told myself it was nothing, just a quirk of the old place, as I continued with my evening, trying to keep the growing unease at bay. One quiet evening, as I was cooking dinner, the soft murmur of the baby monitor perched on the kitchen counter suddenly caught my attention again. This time, the whispers were louder than before, yet still hard to understand. I paused, spoon in hand, listening intently to the static-filled whispers. It sounded like someone was talking, but that couldn't be right. I quickly walked over to the nursery to check on my daughter, but she was soundly asleep, completely undisturbed. Relieved yet still puzzled, I went back to my cooking, deciding to ignore the strange whispers. Over the next few days, the whispering didn't stop. It only got clearer and more frequent. While folding laundry or doing dishes, I would catch my name being whispered through the static. "Lisa," it would say, in a hushed, eerie tone. Hearing my name sent a chill through me each time. It was too specific to be a coincidence, and the sound of my name spoken by an unseen voice made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Despite the growing fear, I tried to convince myself that it was still just crossed signals, maybe snippets of conversations from somewhere nearby. I didn't want to believe that it could be anything more sinister. But then, one night, everything changed. As I was getting ready for bed, the baby monitor crackled to life with a voice so clear it sounded like the person was standing right next to it. "Leave this house or you'll regret it," the voice threatened, cold and menacing. The blood drained from my face as I listened, frozen in fear. This was no interference. It was a direct threat against me and my baby. Panicked, I ran through the house, checking every lock, every window, under beds, and in closets for any sign of an intruder. There was no one. Shaking and scared for our safety, I grabbed the phone and called 911, my voice trembling as I explained that someone was threatening us through the baby monitor. The wait for the police to arrive was agonizing, every minute stretching on as I held my daughter tightly, jumping at every sound. When they finally did come, they searched the house thoroughly but found no one. They suggested that the threat might have come from someone hacking into the baby monitor's frequency, a possibility that made me feel even more vulnerable in my own home. After confronting my neighbor and capturing his confession on camera, I didn't waste any time. I called the police again, this time with solid evidence in hand. They arrived quickly, and I showed them the video of my neighbor admitting to everything. The officers listened intently, their expressions growing more serious as the video played. As soon as it ended, they went straight to my neighbor's house and took him into custody. It was a relief to see him being led away, but I was still shaking, realizing just how much danger my daughter and I had been in. The police conducted a thorough investigation of both our houses. In my home, they discovered several small devices hidden around, all designed to listen in and manipulate the electronics like my baby monitor. It was terrifying to learn just how extensively he had been watching us. The investigation revealed that my neighbor believed he had inherited the rights to my house from his relatives, and that by driving me out, he could reclaim it. This delusion explained his actions, but it didn't make them any less frightening. The police informed me that my neighbor was suffering from significant mental health issues. His family confirmed that he had a history of untreated problems and agreed that he needed help. He was taken for a psychiatric evaluation and placed under care where he could receive the treatment he desperately needed. It was a sad situation, but I was grateful that he was getting help and would no longer be a threat to us. Throughout this ordeal, the support of the police and the understanding of my neighbor's family were crucial. They worked to ensure my safety and helped to resolve a terrifying situation in the most peaceful way possible. I was left deeply shaken, but also relieved that the threat was gone. Knowing the full extent of what had happened, I could finally start to feel safe in my own home again. After my neighbor was arrested, I took some time to reflect on everything that had happened. It was terrifying to realize just how vulnerable my daughter and I had been. But with the situation resolved, I felt a huge relief. I knew that I needed to do something to prevent this kind of thing from happening to anyone else. I became an advocate for mental health awareness and security in technology within our community. Sharing our story, I encouraged my neighbors to take precautions and understand the importance of addressing mental health issues. I also upgraded the security in our home, installing state-of-the-art systems to ensure our safety. Every camera and sensor added made me feel a bit more secure, a bit more in control. I became more vigilant, always aware of our surroundings, and committed to maintaining our safety. This experience, as harrowing as it was, empowered me to stand my ground. I felt a stronger bond to my home, having defended it from what could have been a dire outcome. Now, I focus on creating a secure and loving environment for my daughter, aware of the dangers that lurk, but ready to face them with new strength and determination. It was one of those overcast days when the sky seems unsure if it wants to rain or clear up, casting a gloomy shadow over everything. I was driving down a long, winding road that cut through the heart of dense woods, the kind of place where each tree seemed to have its own ancient story. I was headed for a small, remote motel on the outskirts of a tiny town, far from the usual hustle and bustle. My name is Emily, and I write crime novels for a living. The solitude of such places helps me think, and the silence is my ally when weaving the complex plots of my stories. This particular motel was quaint, barely more than a handful of rooms and rarely fully booked. It seemed like the perfect retreat to finish my latest manuscript, a story about a detective on the trail of a clever and elusive villain. As I checked in, the quietness of the motel struck me immediately. Just a few cars parked outside, suggesting other guests were few and far between. The owner, a friendly enough man with a gentle smile, handed me the keys to my room, mentioning offhandedly that I'd probably find the place to be just what I needed for a good week of uninterrupted writing. Little did I know, my stay at this seemingly peaceful motel would turn out to be anything but quiet. As I settled into my room, the trees outside swayed as if whispering warnings, and the walls, thin as paper, seemed to absorb sounds in a way that made the silence even more pronounced. It was the perfect setting for a crime novel, and soon it would become the scene of my own eerie story. The first couple of days passed quietly enough as I immersed myself in my writing, but I definitely felt there was something off about the isolation of the place. The first sign that caught my attention was at the motel's diner. Every time I sat down for a meal, I noticed a solitary figure in the corner. It was hard to make out details, but each time I left, the figure would stand and leave just after me. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but as it continued to happen, it felt more like a pattern, a deliberate shadowing of my movements. I started feeling more uneasy one night when the quiet was disrupted by the sound of footsteps outside my door. It was late, well past midnight, and no one should have been wandering around. Curious and a bit alarmed, I tiptoed to the window and peered out. I caught a glimpse of a shadow darting away, disappearing into the darkness that clung to the edges of the motel. The next morning, I mentioned it to the motel owner. He shrugged it off, suggesting it was probably just another guest who got the time mixed up. His casual dismissal did little to ease my growing apprehension. Then, the notes started appearing. The first one was slipped under my door while I was deep in a particularly challenging chapter. It read, "Nice story." Simple, harmless on the surface, but the fact that I had no idea who it was from made my skin crawl. More notes followed, each with similar messages like, "Can't wait to see how it ends." None of them were threatening, yet the anonymity of the sender, leaving notes at my door, started to disturb me deeply. Each little piece of paper felt like a silent whisper in the dark, making me wonder who was watching, waiting, and wanting something from me. One night, as I was finishing up some writing, a chilling sound pierced the silence. Someone was tampering with my door lock. My heart leaped to my throat as I froze, listening. "Who's there?" I called out sharply. The noise halted instantly, but the silence that followed was even more terrifying, suggesting that my call had startled someone away from my door. The thought that someone had tried to enter my room shook me deeply. Frantically, I picked up the phone and dialed the front desk, seeking some explanation or reassurance. The night clerk's voice wavered as he informed me that, disturbingly, there were no other guests checked into the rooms near mine. The implication hit me hard. The person trying to get into my room had to be someone from inside the motel, someone who knew the layout and had access to the keys. My hands trembling, I reached for my cell phone to call the police, only to find that it had no service, a not uncommon issue in such a remote location but frustratingly ill-timed. As I tried to think of what to do next, the sound of the door lock clicking sent a spike of fear through me. He was back, and this time, he had gotten in. I quickly retreated to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I looked around for anything to use as a weapon. I grabbed a heavy shampoo bottle and a metal nail file, crude but necessary weapons if it came to defending myself. I stood behind the door, waiting for any sign of movement outside. The silence stretched on, broken only by the soft, eerie creaks of the motel settling around me. I was terrified, but determined to protect myself at all costs. The door to the bathroom shuddered as the stalker threw his weight against it. I gripped the hairdryer tightly, my other hand holding the hot curling iron, ready to defend myself. As the door finally burst open, I felt a rush of adrenaline. The stalker lunged, but I swung the hairdryer hard, hitting him across the face. He staggered back, and I didn't hesitate to play to my advantage, pressing the hot curling iron against his arm as he tried to grab me. He howled in pain and stumbled, giving me just enough time to slip past him and out of the bathroom. I sprinted from my room to the front desk, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The night was quiet, eerily silent as I ran. Bursting into the lobby, I shouted for help. The motel owner, awakened by the commotion, quickly came to my aid. He immediately saw the panic in my eyes and the desperation in my voice and called the police without hesitation. The police arrived surprisingly swiftly, and I explained what had happened, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. They apprehended the stalker on the motel grounds, still reeling from the burns and the blow. It turned out he was a disgruntled former employee who had unresolved issues with the motel's management. He had been lurking around, fueled by a vendetta against the owner. The police took him away, and the relief that washed over me was palpable. The danger was over, the threat removed. I was safe, thanks to my quick thinking and the timely response of the motel owner and police. After everything that happened, I knew I couldn't stay at the motel any longer. I packed my things and headed home early the next morning, the events of the previous night replaying in my mind with every mile I put between myself and that place. Though shaken and still feeling the aftershocks of fear, I found within myself a new determination. As I drove, I thought about how I could use my terrifying experience as the foundation for my next novel. It would be a story of survival, of a woman's fight against a hidden danger, mirroring the ordeal I had just lived through. By the time I reached home, the outline of a new book was forming, each chapter fueled by the adrenaline and resolve that had kept me alive. This real-life horror had transformed into a driving force for my writing. The book that emerged became a bestseller, resonating with readers who found the terror of what could happen in such ordinary settings chillingly plausible. In sharing my story, I wanted to remind everyone that sometimes the scariest tales are not those of ghosts or monsters, but those that could unfold in the quietest, most unexpected places. The scariest stories are sometimes the ones that can happen to anyone, anywhere. As an event planner in the city, I'm usually busy organizing other people's lives, but this particular trip last summer was special. I was finally reuniting with my college friends after several years. We'd rented a large modern Airbnb in a popular tourist town. The place was perfect, spacious, with an open floor plan, multiple bedrooms, and even a basement. The house was within walking distance of restaurants, shops, and all the tourist spots we wanted to check out. As I drove up to the house, I felt a mix of excitement and nostalgia. The house was impressive, with its sleek design and large windows that let in plenty of light. Inside, it was just as beautiful. The living room was huge, with comfortable sofas and a big TV. The kitchen had all the latest gadgets, and each bedroom was cozy and inviting. We couldn't wait to start our 10-day vacation together. The first night, we settled in, exploring the house and catching up on old times. We laughed, cooked dinner together, drank wine, and made plans for the next few days. Everything felt perfect. The town was lively, and we could hear the distant sounds of music and laughter from the nightlife nearby. It felt like a dream getaway, but as night fell, the house seemed to change. The large windows that had let in so much light during the day now made me feel exposed. The shadows in the room seemed deeper, and every little noise made me jump. Annoyed by my overactive imagination, I told myself to get a grip. Instead, I thought about what a fun, relaxing time this was going to be with my friends. Little did I know, our perfect reunion was about to turn into a nightmare. On the second night, we were all hanging out in the living room, laughing and telling stories. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. We all looked at each other, puzzled. Who could it be at this hour? I got up and opened the door to see a man in a utility worker's uniform standing there. He had a serious look on his face. "Hi, I'm from the gas company," he said, holding up an ID badge. "There's been a gas leak reported in the area. I need to check your lines for safety." We didn't know much about gas leaks, but his uniform and ID looked official. My friends and I exchanged glances, and we decided to let him in. He seemed very professional and walked around the house, checking various appliances in the basement. As he worked, he explained what he was doing, which made us feel a bit more comfortable. He even pointed out some things about gas safety that none of us knew. After about 20 minutes, he thanked us and said everything was fine. He assured us there was no leak and that we were safe. We were relieved and saw him out. We talked about how lucky we were to have someone come by and check. It seemed like just another part of our adventure. The next morning, as we were getting ready for the day, we started to notice that some things were missing. My friend Jane couldn't find her laptop, and I realized my cash was gone. Then, someone else noticed that a piece of jewelry was missing. Panic set in as we realized we had been duped by the fake utility worker. We immediately contacted the host, who was shocked and informed us that no inspections had been scheduled. We then called the police and reported the incident, feeling both scared and foolish for letting a stranger into the house so easily. The police arrived quickly after our call. They took our statements and examined the house. When we told them about the utility worker, their expressions became serious. The officer in charge explained that there had been similar incidents in the area. An imposter had been using a fake uniform and ID to gain access to homes, stealing valuables while pretending to conduct inspections. This news made us feel incredibly vulnerable. We had let a criminal into our home without a second thought. That night I tried to sleep, but I couldn't get my mind to switch off. Every creak and groan of the old house made me sit up and listen intently. At one point, I heard faint noises coming from the basement. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I lay awake for hours, listening, every sound making me more and more anxious. The following evening, after a nice dinner out, we returned to the house. As we walked up to the door, I noticed it was slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. We exchanged worried looks and slowly pushed the door open. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. We tiptoed in, afraid of what we might find. It didn't take long to realize that more items were missing. More cash, a camera, and some of our clothes. Panic set in. We realized the imposter might still be inside. Feeling a mix of fear and determination, I grabbed a kitchen knife and decided to check the basement with my friend Jake. We moved as quietly as we could, the wooden steps creaking under our weight. When we reached the basement door, it was unlocked. We slowly opened it and descended the stairs. The basement was dark and cold. With trembling hands, I turned on the light. What we saw made my blood run cold. There were signs that someone had been living there. Discarded food, a sleeping bag, and personal items scattered around. My breath caught in my throat as I heard footsteps above us. The imposter was still in the house. We looked at each other, eyes wide with fear. We needed to get out, but we couldn't risk alerting the intruder. We slowly made our way back up the stairs, the sounds above us growing louder. Just as we reached the top, the basement door creaked open. We froze, holding our breaths, praying not to be discovered. The footsteps paused, then moved away. Seizing the moment, we bolted up the remaining steps and ran out the front door, the rest of our friends following as we all shouted our way out of the house. We didn't stop running until we were safely in a neighbor's house, calling the police once again. The police searched the area and found the imposter a few blocks away, trying to make his escape. They apprehended him quickly. He was identified as a local criminal with a history of home invasions and theft. The relief I felt knowing he was caught was immense, but the fear still lingered. The police recovered most of our stolen items and assured us that the imposter would be prosecuted. Shaken but relieved, my friends and I decided to cut the trip short and return home. The excitement and joy we had felt at the beginning of our reunion were replaced with anxiety and fear. Reflecting on the experience, I felt grateful that nothing worse had happened. However, I was deeply disturbed by how easily we were fooled. We had let a stranger into our home without a second thought, simply because he wore a uniform and had an ID badge. The incident served as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance and caution, even in seemingly safe environments. It was a regular Tuesday evening as the sun set over the busy city, leaving my one-bedroom apartment dimly lit by the last bits of daylight. I live alone and enjoy the quiet of my high-tech home right in the middle of the city noise. My place is cozy but modern, filled with gadgets like voice-activated lights and a smart thermostat that knows when I'm coming home. Being a software developer, I like things to be just right, and that includes how I keep my apartment. That's why I noticed right away when things started to look a bit wrong. First, it was a light I found on in the kitchen when I was sure I had turned it off before leaving that morning. Then, one evening, I walked in to find music playing that I hadn't turned on. It was odd, but I thought maybe my devices were just acting up. But then I started feeling more uncomfortable. One night, after a long day of coding, I sat down and saw that my books weren't lined up the way I had left them. A novel was sticking out more than it should, and a cookbook was not in its usual spot. It was as if someone else had been touching them. That's when I felt really uneasy. The thought that someone might be getting into my apartment was scary. I looked around my living room, with its comfortable couch and all my technology, and felt exposed. This was meant to be my safe place, but suddenly, it seemed like I might not be alone after all. The night didn't feel so normal anymore. So I started paying more attention to the small things happening around my apartment. The first odd thing I noticed was from my smart home system's logs. The logs showed that lights in my apartment were turning on and off at times when I knew I wasn't there. At first I thought maybe it was just a glitch in the system. Technology can mess up sometimes, so I tried not to worry too much about it. But then, one evening, something else happened that made me really uneasy. I came home from work and went straight to the kitchen to make some dinner. That's when I saw that my kitchen utensils weren't where I left them in the morning. I always keep my kitchen very tidy, with everything in its specific place. Seeing the spoons and knives mixed up and not in their usual spots bothered me a lot. It was as if someone had used them and then put them back carelessly. This wasn't like me at all. The third incident really made me scared. While I was at work one day, my phone pinged with an alert from my home security camera. It said motion was detected inside my apartment. My heart started beating faster, and I opened the app immediately to see the live feed from the camera. I expected to see someone there, but there was nothing out of place, just my quiet living room. Even though I saw nothing, this alert made me feel very nervous. It seemed more and more likely that someone else was entering my apartment when I wasn't there. Who could it be? And why would they do this? These questions kept running through my head as I began to feel less and less safe in my own home. Determined to find out what was happening in my apartment, I decided to buy an RF detector. This device can find hidden cameras by detecting radio frequencies they emit. When I got it, I went through every inch of my living room, and that's when I found it. Hidden among my gadgets was a USB charger plugged into a wall socket, but it wasn't just any charger, it was a hidden camera. Finding that camera, knowing someone had been watching me in my own home, made me feel cold all over. It was like someone had poured ice water down my back. I didn't stop there. With my knowledge of technology, I managed to access the footage stored on the camera. What I saw was shocking. There were video clips of me, just doing my daily things, cooking, watching TV, and even dancing to a song in my living room. Seeing myself on that screen, recorded without my knowledge, made my stomach turn. It was a deep violation of my privacy, and I felt exposed and vulnerable in a place that was supposed to be my safe haven. But the worst part came when I continued watching the footage. The camera had also captured the person who planted it. My heart nearly stopped when I recognized him. It was the building's maintenance man. Someone I had greeted many times and let into my home to fix things. The footage showed him using keys to enter my apartment several times when I was out. It was hard to believe someone I thought I could trust was betraying me like this. Fueled by anger and a need to catch him red-handed, I came up with a plan. I told the building manager I would be away for the weekend, but instead, I stayed hidden in my apartment. I chose a small closet with a good view of the living room and waited with my phone set to record. The night grew deep, and then I heard it, the sound of keys in the door. He came in, talking to himself as if he was used to being here. He started going through my things, my papers, my photos. Watching him handle my personal belongings made me feel sick and outraged at the same time. I couldn't believe this was happening, right here in my sanctuary, where I should have felt secure. As I watched the maintenance man rummage through my drawers, a mix of anger and fear pumped through my veins. I knew I had to confront him, but I needed to stay calm. I stepped out of the closet, phone in hand, recording every move he made. He jumped when he saw me, his face turning pale with shock. "What are you doing?" I demanded. His eyes darted around, looking for an excuse. "I was just checking on the apartment's safety," he stammered, a weak excuse that made no sense. I held up my phone, showing him the video of him entering my apartment and installing the camera. "I have everything on video. You've been spying on me," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. He began to apologize, his words tumbling out in a nervous rush, but I cut him off. "Leave now and never come back. If you do, I'll show this video to everyone." After he left, I took no chances. I changed the locks on my doors myself, replacing them with high-security versions that only I had the keys to. I also installed several more cameras around my apartment, covering every possible angle. No one was going to invade my privacy again. The next day, I went to the building management and showed them the footage. They were horrified and immediately fired the maintenance man. They also assured me that they would report him to the authorities. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, knowing that he would no longer be a threat to me or anyone else in the building. I had stood up for myself, and it had made a difference. After everything that happened, I found myself sitting quietly in my living room, the same room that had once been unknowingly watched. It felt different now. I was both relieved that the ordeal was over and paranoid that it could happen again. My home, my sanctuary, had been violated, and that wasn't something I could just shake off. To regain my sense of security, I upgraded my home security system to the most advanced technology available. I researched the best cameras and alarms, making sure every inch of my apartment was covered. Now, I could monitor everything from my phone, no matter where I was. This control gave me a small comfort, but the echo of being watched lingered in my mind. Despite the lingering fear, I found a new sense of purpose. I became an advocate for privacy and security within my community. I shared my story with my neighbors, urged them to check their own homes for hidden devices, and organized workshops on personal security. Helping others protect themselves helped me feel like I was taking back control, not just over my apartment, but over my life. The experience taught me to trust my instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. I learned that I am capable of protecting myself, but it also taught me the importance of community. We look out for each other. I do feel safer now, but I'm always aware, always watching. The fear has made me more cautious, but it has also made me stronger. I'm not just a victim, I'm a survivor who fought back.